In a quiet corner of the galaxy, far beyond the reaches of familiar star systems, there existed a world unlike any humans had ever imagined. The planet was vast, with sprawling landscapes of crystal plains, dense metallic forests, and oceans that shimmered with a strange bioluminescent glow. Its sky was alive with colors that changed with the shifting magnetic fields, painting breathtaking patterns that no artist could replicate. On this world, a civilization had thrived for countless centuries, evolving in ways that made them unlike anything else in the known universe. They were intelligent, highly advanced, and deeply connected to the technology and ecology of their planet. Every building, every device, and every system seemed to pulse with life, as if the world itself was part of a single, unified organism. The aliens who lived there were not humanoid in appearance. Their bodies were elongated and covered with smooth, reflective scales that could change color according to mood or environmental conditions. They had multiple limbs, each capable of performing complex tasks with incredible precision. Their eyes were large, multifaceted, and adapted to perceive the full spectrum of light, allowing them to see not only what was visible but also energy patterns, gravitational distortions, and even subtle changes in molecular vibrations. Their society had grown around principles of knowledge, cooperation, and technological mastery, making them one of the most advanced civilizations in their sector of space. Yet, despite their brilliance, they were not invincible. For generations, they had lived in relative peace, enjoying the fruits of their achievements while exploring the mysteries of the galaxy. Their fleets had traveled to distant star systems, exchanging knowledge with other civilizations, establishing trade routes, and occasionally intervening to prevent catastrophic events. They had built massive orbital stations, cities suspended in space, and networks of interstellar communication that could transmit information instantaneously across light. Their technology was so advanced that some of their devices appeared almost magical, manipulating energy and matter in ways that seemed impossible to anyone outside their species. But all of this, all their intelligence and power, could not protect them from the threat that was about to arrive. It started with unusual signals in the outer sectors of their planetary system. Satellites and monitoring stations picked up anomalies, distortions in the gravitational field, sudden bursts of radiation, and strange patterned energy emissions that did not match any known celestial phenomena. Scientists and analysts studied the data, initially thinking it was a natural event, a stellar flare, a comet, or an unstable asteroid belt. But the anomalies persisted and intensified. Soon, small craft sent to investigate failed to return, and communication with them was lost entirely. Panic slowly began to spread among the higher councils of the alien civilization. Something was approaching, something powerful, and it was not just an accident of nature. The first real signs of danger came when a scouting fleet encountered ships that were entirely unknown. They were massive, angular, and terrifyingly fast, unlike anything the aliens had seen. These vessels emitted a low-frequency hum that seemed to resonate through the very fabric of space, shaking even the most hardened ship's hulls. The attacking forces did not communicate. They struck with precision and brutality, targeting vital infrastructure and military outposts. The alien leaders quickly realized that this was no ordinary raid or act of aggression. It was a calculated invasion, and they were completely unprepared to defend against it. Within days, entire cities were under siege. Communication networks were disrupted, defensive satellites destroyed, and supply lines cut off. Panic spread among the population. Despite their technological superiority, the aliens found themselves struggling to respond effectively. Their weapons, designed for defense and controlled precision, were no match for the raw destructive power of the attackers. It was as if the invaders had studied their systems, understood their weaknesses, and exploited them with ruthless efficiency. Ordinary citizens watched from their homes, witnessing the skies above fill with streaks of fire and explosions as their once secure world descended into chaos. The sense of helplessness was overwhelming, even for a civilization that had faced challenges before. The leaders convened emergency councils to strategize, poring over ancient texts, simulations, and all available intelligence. They explored every option, negotiating, retreating, forming alliances with nearby civilizations, even hiding underground. Yet every path seemed doomed to fail. Conventional tactics had no effect on the enemy. Communication with allies outside the system was impossible due to jamming signals that distorted all outgoing transmissions. The aliens were trapped in a situation they could not solve with their own strength. Fear grew, not only for the survival of their civilization but for the very existence of their people. In desperation, the council turned to an option that had been rarely used and shrouded in legend. Their archives contained references to a group of interstellar warriors known as the Deathworlders. These beings were feared across countless galaxies, known not only for their unmatched combat skills but also for their uncompromising approach to justice and warfare. It was said that they would answer a distress call from any civilization in mortal peril, but at a cost. They were not allies in the traditional sense. They were forces of retribution. They did not negotiate, they did not compromise, and they did not forgive. The Deathworlders' intervention guaranteed survival, but it also meant unleashing a power that could annihilate both enemy and innocent alike if misused. The decision was not easy. Some members of the council feared summoning such a force, worrying about the destruction that might follow. Others argued that their hands were already tied, that the invaders would leave nothing if they did not act. After heated debate and careful consideration, the council finally agreed to send the SOS their last, desperate plea for survival. The process of activating the signal was complex, involving precise calculations, alignment with ancient coordinates, and the use of a rare energy spectrum that only the Deathworlders systems could detect. Once transmitted, the signal surged through the void of space, traveling faster than any ordinary message, carrying not just a call for help but a warning. The aliens were on the brink of annihilation as the SOS spread through the galaxy. Those sending it could only hope it reached the intended recipients. There was no guarantee. The Deathworlders were known to answer calls only when the threat was dire and undeniable. There was no way to know how long it would take for them to arrive or what form their intervention would take. In the meantime, the alien civilization prepared for what might be the final stand. Emergency shelters were activated, evacuation routes mapped, and critical systems fortified. Scientists and engineers worked tirelessly to maintain life support, repair damaged infrastructure, and protect civilians. Fear was a constant companion, but so was a fragile thread of hope, the hope that their plea had been heard. Even in the darkest hours, the alien leaders remembered the stories of those who had survived Deathworlder intervention before. Entire worlds had been saved from certain destruction, even if the cost was high. The legends spoke of cities left in ruins, but of populations spared, of invaders completely obliterated, and of a civilization given a second chance. That knowledge, passed down through centuries, became their source of courage. They knew that once the Deathworlders arrived, nothing would be the same again. Their intervention would be swift, decisive, and total. It was a gamble, but at that moment it was the only chance to save their people. As the alien leaders waited, watching the skies for any sign of incoming ships, a tense silence settled over their command centers. The population remained largely unaware of the SOS, shielded from the full horror to prevent panic, but the leaders carried the weight of the decision alone. Each day brought news of new attacks, of resources lost, of systems failing. It was a test of endurance, patience, and faith. And through it all, the SOS traveled onward through the vast emptiness of space, a beacon of hope and desperation alike, destined to reach ears that were known across galaxies as merciless, unstoppable, and the last hope for the endangered. This was a moment suspended in time, a critical turning point for the alien civilization. They had reached the limits of what they could endure, the edge of what their technology and intellect could defend against. Beyond that point lay uncertainty, danger, and the promise of a force that would not stop until justice or vengeance was served. The fate of their world hung in the balance, carried on a signal sent with trembling hands but unbreakable intent. The SOS was more than a call for help. It was the ultimate declaration. Their civilization would survive no matter what the cost, and the Deathworlders would come to ensure that survival. Times seemed to stretch endlessly for the alien civilization after they had sent out their SOS. Days turned into nights, and nights blurred into days, but there was no sign of help. The invaders continued their relentless attacks, tearing through cities, disrupting communications, and striking fear into every corner of the planet. The people lived in constant tension, never knowing which region would be targeted next. Families huddled in makeshift shelters, while the alien leaders worked tirelessly to coordinate defenses with whatever resources remained. Morale was low, and despair hung over the civilization like a heavy shadow. But somewhere, far beyond the known reaches of their star system, the SOS signal had been detected, and the wheels of fate had begun to turn. Then, as if appearing from a dream or a sudden shift in reality, the first signs of the Deathworlders' fleet emerged on the horizon. From the alien world, the skies beyond the atmosphere shimmered with faint lights, at first easy to mistake for distant stars or atmospheric phenomena. But soon the movement became unmistakable. Massive silhouettes of ships, far larger than any the aliens had ever constructed or seen, began to take shape. Each vessel was angular and imposing, designed with a purpose that radiated power and precision. Their hulls reflected the light of the planet's twin suns, gleaming metallic and ominous, while energy thrusters pushed them effortlessly through space. The arrival was silent at first, a slow and deliberate advance that seemed to defy the chaos already consuming the planet below. The Deathworlders' ships were not like ordinary military crafts. They were designed for efficiency and dominance, built to withstand extreme conditions, and armed with weapons that seemed almost alive, humming with energy that could pierce through the strongest shields. Even from orbit, the aliens could feel the presence of the fleet, a palpable force that seemed to ripple through the very fabric of space. Scientists, military strategists, and civilians alike stared in awe, fear, and a strange mixture of hope. This was a force beyond comprehension, an unstoppable tide of power summoned by their desperate plea. It was no exaggeration to say that the appearance of the fleet marked a turning point in the survival of their civilization. As the Deathworlders approached, the invaders themselves noticed the change in the battlefield. Reports began to trickle in of distant sensors picking up massive ships moving at impossible speeds. For the first time in the conflict, the attackers experienced hesitation, confusion, and fear. The mere presence of the Deathworlders' fleet disrupted their formations, causing disarray in their ranks. They attempted to launch attacks preemptively, but their weapons seemed ineffective, deflected by energy fields or simply bypassed by the advanced maneuvering of the incoming ships. Within hours, it became clear that the arrival of the Deathworlders was not merely a reinforcement, it was a force capable of overwhelming the enemy entirely. From the alien leaders' perspective, the fleet was both uninspiring and terrifying. They had read legends of the Deathworlders' stories passed down through generations, about how entire civilizations had been saved from annihilation by these merciless warriors. Yet those same legends spoke of destruction and fear, of worlds left in ruins even when the people were spared. The alien leaders watched as a fleet deployed in patterns that seemed random to an untrained eye but were actually perfect calculations of strategy and efficiency. Ships spread out into formations that maximized coverage while minimizing vulnerability, creating an almost impenetrable presence around the planet. Sensors detected energy fluctuations and weapons being activated, though nothing had yet been fired. That aliens could feel the intensity of the preparation, the concentrated power ready to unleash fury at any moment. For the population below, the arrival was visible in the sky as more than just shapes. Enormous ships glided through the atmosphere's edge, their engines leaving trails of light that shimmered across the horizon. It was a sight unlike anything the citizens had ever witnessed, both beautiful and terrifying. Some watched in wonder, believing salvation had finally arrived. Others trembled, fearing that such immense power might not distinguish between friend and foe. Even children sensed the weight of the moment, staring with wide eyes at the skies, unable to comprehend the scale of the forces above them. The entire planet seemed to hold its breath, caught between hope and fear, awaiting the first moves of the Deathworlders. The first contact between the fleets was inevitable. The invaders, realizing that these new forces were far beyond their expectations, attempted to regroup and defend their positions. Their ships moved in patterns they believed would allow them to strike effectively. But the Deathworlders' tactics were unlike anything they had seen. Without warning, some of the Deathworlders' ships accelerated in sudden bursts, disappearing from one location and reappearing in another as if they attacked with precision, targeting the command ships and weapon arrays first, ensuring that the invaders could not coordinate their defense. Energy blasts struck with pinpoint accuracy, disabling ships almost instantly while leaving others untouched, demonstrating the deliberate and calculated nature of the assault. The invaders realized too late that they were dealing with a predator that hunted with intelligence, patience, and overwhelming force. The aliens, watching from their cities and command centers, experienced mixed emotions. Relief washed over them as they saw the enemy beginning to falter, their formations breaking apart under the Deathworlders' assault. Yet there was also fear. The legends were correct. The Deathworlders were not gentle, and their power was immense. The aliens could not predict the full extent of what would happen next. Even as they hoped for the best, they braced themselves for the possibility of collateral destruction. Buildings trembled from distant explosions, and communications systems experienced interference as energy signatures from the Deathworlders. Ships coursed through the planet's orbit. The population was reminded that this was not a simple rescue mission but the intervention of a force that answered only to its own code of justice. Within the command centers, scientists and engineers monitored the fleet's movements with fascination. They could see patterns in how the ships deployed, how energy fields spread, and how weapons were primed. For the first time, they felt the scale of the universe beyond their world, the raw power that could travel across light years in response to a plea for help. They realized that the Deathworlders operated under a philosophy that was alien to their own, prioritizing efficiency and total control over sentiment and negotiation. It was a sobering lesson in humility. While the people of their civilization had relied on intelligence, planning, and technology to dominate their environment, the Deathworlders demonstrated a level of skill and understanding that far exceeded even their most advanced systems. The invaders, recognizing the futility of conventional attacks, began to retreat in some areas. But the Deathworlders pursued with relentless precision. There was no hesitation, no mercy for those who had chosen aggression. The alien leaders noticed the psychological impact on the enemy as well. The once confident invaders were now disorganized, their fear apparent even through long-range sensors. Ships began to collide in confusion, systems overloaded, and some crews abandoned their posts entirely. It became clear that the Deathworlders' mere presence had already shifted the balance of power, tipping the scales in favor of the SOS sending aliens. Meanwhile, the citizens began to understand that help had arrived in a way far beyond their imagination. They watched the skies, saw the massive ships maneuvering in perfect coordination, and witnessed the first waves of energy discharges that dismantled the invaders' fleets in orbit. There was cheering, crying, and disbelief. Many had thought their civilization was doomed. Now they realized that salvation had come, but not in the way they had expected. The Deathworlders' intervention was dramatic, swift, and absolute. It was unlike any battle or rescue they had ever imagined. For the first time in weeks, hope replaced despair, though tempered with awe and fear for the raw force at play. As the fleet settled into strategic positions around the planet, the alien leaders began to coordinate with what little communication the Deathworlders allowed. Though the Deathworlders did not speak in the traditional sense, their actions communicated intent. They would target threats, preserve the innocent where possible, and dismantle any opposition with decisive force. The aliens had never experienced a military presence like this one that combined judgment, intelligence, and raw destructive capability into a single, cohesive unit. They watched, learned, and adjusted, realizing that the Deathworlders were both their saviors and a lesson in the harsh realities of the universe. The arrival of the fleet also had another impact. It boosted morale among the alien defenders. Though their own forces had been overwhelmed, the presence of the Deathworlders gave them a sense of purpose. They could now coordinate small strikes, evacuate civilians more safely, and plan recovery efforts, knowing that the ultimate power was now on their side. Engineers worked to repair damaged systems, strategists plotted defensive positions, and the population rallied around the hope that their civilization could survive. It was a turning point not just in the battle but in the spirit of the people themselves. The alien civilization had witnessed a transformation. From the brink of destruction, they now saw a path forward. The Deathworlders' fleet was a force of inevitability, a reminder that in the vastness of space, there were powers beyond comprehension, responding only to signals of life at risk. The sky above the planet remained alive with the glimmering presence of massive ships, energy discharges, and precise movements. Citizens and leaders alike realized that the battle was far from over. But the arrival of the Deathworlders had changed everything. Their civilization had been saved from immediate annihilation, and the SOS had been answered with a fury and precision that no one could have imagined, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their survival story. The moment of first contact arrived sooner than the aliens had dared to hope. From the command centers and observation posts scattered across their planet, leaders and citizens watched as the vast Deathworlder fleet moved with an eerie precision toward the invading forces. The enemy, once confident and aggressive, was now forced into defensive formations, though those efforts were weak and disorganized. From orbit, the alien leaders could see the massive enemy ships attempting to regroup, their movements panicked and erratic. The Deathworlders, by contrast, displayed an unshakable calm, each ship moving like a predator calculating its strike. There was no hesitation, no misfire, no error. It was as if the Deathworlders had already anticipated every move the invaders could make, and they were ready to counter it before it even happened. The first attacks were swift and merciless. Energy beams cut through the darkness of space with blinding intensity, striking the enemy's lead vessels. These were not random strikes or attempts to intimidate. They were precise, targeted blows aimed at disabling the invaders' command systems and primary weapon arrays. Within moments, the enemy's coordination began to collapse. Ships collided in confusion, some exploding in a chain reaction that sent shockwaves across the battlefield. The aliens observing from their planet below could feel the energy pulses from orbit, vibrations running through the planet's crust and oceans, a constant reminder of the power now unleashed above them. As the battle unfolded, it became evident that the Deathworlders did not fight like conventional military forces. They did not rely solely on firepower or numbers. Instead, every maneuver was calculated to exploit weaknesses, to strike at the enemy's vulnerabilities, and to eliminate threats with maximum efficiency. One moment a Deathworlder ship would appear on the edge of a formation, disabling a critical energy shield. The next, another would sweep in, targeting supply lines and reinforcements. The enemy forces, once confident in their strength, were now in disarray. Their communications scrambled, sensors disrupted, and morale shattered. Panic rippled through their ranks as they realized that they were facing an opponent that not only matched their firepower but surpassed it. With strategy and precision, on the ground, the alien population watched the unfolding spectacle with a mixture of awe, fear, and relief. For weeks, they had endured relentless attacks, uncertainty, and despair. Now, salvation had arrived, though it was not gentle or quiet. The sky above them was filled with flashes of light, beams of energy, and massive explosions. Ships that had once seemed invincible were being torn apart with surgical efficiency. The aliens could not help but marvel at the scale and capability of the Deathworlder fleet. Every movement was intentional, every strike calculated, and every result devastating to the enemy. It was a display of power that went beyond mere technology. It was as if the Deathworlders themselves were an unstoppable force of nature. Were Redditor answering the call of a desperate civilization? The first encounter also revealed the psychological effect of the Deathworlders on the enemy. The invaders had been confident, arrogant even, in their initial assaults. They believed themselves technologically superior and tactically advanced, but the Deathworlders shattered that confidence within minutes. Ships that had previously led aggressive attacks now faltered, their crews uncertain and terrified. Some abandoned their posts entirely, while others attempted reckless maneuvers that only hastened their destruction. It became clear that the Deathworlders did not merely attack, they dominated, imposing fear and control over the battlefield before physically dismantling the enemy. The alien leaders were both relieved and cautious. They understood that the Deathworlders' methods were ruthless, and that collateral damage was inevitable. Their own ships, though advanced, were dwarfed in size and firepower by the Deathworlder vessels. Even so, the presence of the fleet gave them the opportunity to reorganize and protect key areas of the planet. Evacuation efforts accelerated, critical infrastructure was reinforced, and civilians were moved to safer zones, guided by both fear and hope. The planet's survival now depended not on the aliens' technology alone, but on the combination of their ingenuity and the overwhelming might of the Deathworlders. The battle intensified as the Deathworlders advanced deeper into the invaders' formation. Their ships moved in patterns that seemed chaotic to an outside observer but were in fact highly strategic. They struck from multiple angles, forcing the enemy to divide their attention and resources. When one squadron disabled a key weapon system, another simultaneously cut off reinforcements, creating a perfect trap. Enemy ships found themselves caught in crossfires, energy fields, and manipulative gravitational distortions that rendered their evasive maneuvers useless. The aliens watching realized that the Deathworlders were not simply fighting to defend, they were executing a complete dismantling of the enemy's operational capability, leaving no chance for retaliation. Despite the overwhelming power of the alien leaders noted one unusual trait. The fleet seemed to prioritize threats rather than random destruction. Civilian areas and non-combatant systems were avoided where possible. Ships that posed no immediate danger were left untouched. It was a reminder that the Deathworlders operated under their own strict code, one that valued efficiency, justice, and survival over mindless slaughter. The aliens realized that while the Deathworlders were terrifying and unpredictable, they were also disciplined. Their intervention was calculated, and their actions could be anticipated if studied carefully. This understanding allowed the alien leaders to coordinate more effectively, guiding civilians to safety while letting the Deathworlders focus on eliminating the enemy. The first encounter also demonstrated the technological superiority of the Deathworlders in ways that went beyond raw firepower. Their ships were capable of sudden bursts of speed, appearing in unexpected locations almost instantaneously. Their weapons could bypass conventional shields and armor, targeting weak points that the invaders did not even know existed. Defensive measures that had previously been considered state-of-the-art were rendered obsolete. Observers on the alien planet realized that this was not merely a battle of machines, but a clash of intelligence, strategy, and experience. The Deathworlders had fought countless battles across the galaxy, learning from each encounter, adapting, and evolving their tactics to ensure success. For the enemy forces, the first encounter was a nightmare. They had believed they were unstoppable, confident in their own technology and combat skills. Yet, within hours of the Deathworlders' arrival, their confidence turned into panic, their order into chaos. Ships were destroyed in rapid succession, formations broken, and communication networks crippled. The enemy commanders attempted to regroup, issuing frantic orders and desperate commands, but the Deathworlders anticipated their moves with uncanny accuracy. It was as if the attackers were being hunted, each decision counted before it could be fully executed. Fear spread not just among individual crews, but across the entire invading force, weakening them before they could even mount a proper defense. On the alien homeworld, the impact of the first encounter was profound. People who had lived in constant fear began to hope. Children watched in wonder as streaks of light tore across the sky. Though they did not fully understand the magnitude of what was happening, adults felt a cautious relief, knowing that the Deathworlders' intervention had given their civilization a chance to survive. Commanders and strategists began to adapt their own tactics, working in tandem with the overwhelming power of the fleet. For the first time in weeks, the alien civilization felt that survival was possible, even if victory would require patience, courage, and careful coordination with the formidable warriors now fighting above them. The battle raged for hours, a continuous display of power, strategy, and precision. The Deathworlders moved as if they were an extension of the universe itself. Each ship a node in a vast network of control, each weapon strike deliberate and exact. The enemy forces, despite their technology and numbers, could not match the coordination, foresight, or raw power of their opponents. One by one their ships were disabled or destroyed, their formations collapsing like a house of cards. The alien leaders monitored the progress with a mixture of awe and gratitude, recognizing that their civilization was witnessing a rare and extraordinary event, a display of interstellar might that had been summoned by their own desperation and now acted in their defense. By the end of the first encounter, the battlefield had shifted dramatically. The invaders were no longer confident aggressors but disoriented and fearful. Their command structures were in ruins, many ships had been destroyed, and their morale had plummeted. The Deathworlders, while not finished with the battle, had established dominance. The aliens watching from their planet realized that the tide had truly turned. The fleet that had arrived in response to their SOS was not merely fighting, it was asserting absolute control, ensuring that the enemy could not recover. and demonstrating the devastating consequences of underestimating a force as formidable as the death. As the dust settled in orbit and the first waves of combat ended, the alien leaders knew that the presence of the Deathworlders had changed the entire course of the conflict. Their civilization had been saved from immediate destruction, their enemy weakened beyond recovery, and a powerful ally, though unpredictable and fearsome, now fought on their side. The first encounter had been both a demonstration and a warning. The Deathworlders were a force of nature, answering only to a code of survival and justice, and any who threatened the innocent would face their wrath. It was a lesson the alien civilization would never forget. As the battle continued, the alien civilization watched with a mixture of hope and awe. The invaders, once aggressive and confident, were now struggling to maintain cohesion, their ships scattered and disorganized, their morale in tatters. Yet, despite the apparent advantage, the Deathworlders did not rush blindly into the chaos. Instead, they demonstrated a discipline and strategic patience that set them apart from any force the galaxy had ever seen. They knew exactly what they were doing. Every movement, every strike, every maneuver was part of a greater plan. Our plan designed to ensure complete victory while minimizing unnecessary risk to the innocent. The Deathworlders' approach was methodical. They began to focus on critical points in the enemy's formation. Command ships, weapon platforms, and supply vessels were targeted first, not because they were easy to hit, but because their destruction would cripple the invaders' ability to fight back. In mere moments, the enemy's chain of command was disrupted. Orders became delayed, contradictory, or impossible to execute. Ships that had once moved in tight, coordinated formations now collided or retreated in confusion. The Deathworlders, however, were always 3 steps ahead. Sensors and reconnaissance systems aboard their ships detected even the slightest movement of the enemy, and they adjusted their tactics instantly. What seemed like sudden attacks or lightning-fast maneuvers to outside observers were, in reality, carefully calculated actions based on deep understanding of the enemy's weaknesses. The alien leaders could see the difference. This made immediately. With the enemy destabilized, the Deathworlders began to carve through their forces systematically. Groups of invader ships were isolated, surrounded, and dismantled with precision. There was no hesitation, no wasted effort. Each enemy ship taken down was a step closer to victory. Yet, the Deathworlders also displayed remarkable control. Unlike the invaders who attacked indiscriminately and without thought, the Deathworlders were selective. Civilians, non-combatant systems, and infrastructure that had not been part of the conflict were left untouched. Their focus was entirely on the aggressors. It became clear that the Deathworlders were not merely fighters, they were arbiters of a harsh, unforgiving justice. As the battle intensified, the invaders realized too late the magnitude of their miscalculation. They had believed that no force in the galaxy could match them, and certainly not one summoned by the aliens. SOS, but the Deathworlders were not just a military power, they were a force that combined intelligence, experience, and a sense of absolute judgment. The invaders' attacks became desperate and reckless. Some attempted to flee, others tried to regroup and launch counterattacks, but the Deathworlders anticipated each move. Every escape route was blocked, every attempt at retaliation countered before it could fully develop. The tide had truly turned, and there was no path back for the aggressors on the alien homeworld. The impact of this turning point was profound. For weeks, the population had lived under constant fear, uncertainty, and despair. Entire cities had been destroyed, supply lines cut off, and families separated. Yet now, with the Deathworlders' decisive actions, hope began to flourish. Citizens watched from their shelters, seeing the enemy fleet crumble in orbit. Children, who had only known terror and confusion, glimpsed the sky filled not with destruction, but with the organized, purposeful presence of the Death. Adults felt relief, but also a deep sense of awe and respect for the power that had intervened on their behalf. This was not just a military victory. It was a demonstration of a force that answered calls for help with ruthless efficiency and unmatched skill. The alien leaders themselves were both relieved and cautious. They understood the Deathworlders' methods. Though the invaders were being dismantled, the Deathworlders would not tolerate hesitation, error, or disobedience from any aggressor. They also recognized that the Deathworlders' judgment was final. Any enemy that posed a threat would be neutralized, no matter the cost. This understanding allowed the alien leaders to coordinate their own efforts more effectively. Evacuations were organized with greater confidence, damaged infrastructure was repaired more rapidly, and remaining defensive units were redeployed to assist in areas still under threat. For the first time, the alien civilization could breathe, even if only slightly, knowing that the outcome was no longer entirely in question. Meanwhile, the Deathworlders continued their systematic approach. They used advanced sensors to detect hidden enemy positions, ambushes, and reinforcements. Enemy ships that attempted to hide behind asteroids or planetary rings were located and neutralized with precision strikes. The Deathworlders' energy weapons pierced shields that had been considered impenetrable, disabling engines, weapons, and communications in seconds. It was a level of control and effectiveness that left the aliens marveling at the scale and sophistication of the fleet. Even their most advanced technology could not match the adaptability and intelligence of the Deathworlders. The invaders' morale, already fragile, began to collapse entirely. Reports came in of mutinies aboard enemy vessels, crews abandoning their posts, and commanders making irrational decisions in desperation. The Deathworlders exploited these weaknesses fully, turning disorganized attempts at resistance into opportunities for complete destruction. Ships were disabled one by one, isolated groups were encircled, and energy weapons struck with unerring accuracy. It was a relentless, systematic dismantling of the enemy's operational capacity, a demonstration of power and efficiency that left no room for hope or recovery. On the ground, the aliens noticed that the Deathworlders' intervention was as much psychological as it was physical. The invaders, once bold and threatening, were now cowed, their confidence shattered. This shift had a direct impact on the planet's population. Fear and despair began to give way to courage and optimism. Citizens emerged from shelters to help with evacuation efforts. Engineers repaired essential systems, and military units reorganized to assist where needed. The presence of the Deathworlders inspired cooperation and hope. People realized that they were witnessing a force that not only protected them but also enforced a code of justice across the battlefield, ensuring that the aggressors would not recover. As the turning point solidified, the Deathworlders began to demonstrate their broader strategic vision. They did not merely focus on immediate threats, they anticipated the enemy's movements and countered them before they could be executed. Reinforcements attempting to reach the battle were intercepted and neutralized. Escape attempts were blocked. Command structures were dismantled. The invaders found themselves trapped in a web of superior intelligence and firepower. Each action they took only hastened their own destruction. The Deathworlders' methodical approach ensured that the battle was not only won but completed in a manner that left no room for resurgence. The alien leaders were able to coordinate more effectively as the Deathworlders executed their strategy. With the enemy fleet crippled, the aliens could focus on evacuating remaining civilians, repairing critical infrastructure, and protecting their remaining forces. The combination of the Deathworlders' overwhelming power and the aliens' local knowledge created a synergy that accelerated the defeat of the invaders. Where the aliens had once been powerless, they now found themselves participants in the recovery and defense of their civilization. The Deathworlders, while not communicative in a traditional sense, allowed their presence to guide the survivors in subtle ways, ensuring that their efforts were supported and effective. The enemy, facing total defeat, attempted last-ditch maneuvers. Some groups of ships tried to regroup in distant sectors, hoping to escape the Deathworlders' reach. Others attempted to launch coordinated attacks on critical civilian or military targets. But the Deathworlders were always ahead. Their sensors detected every move, their weapons struck with precision, and their ships moved faster than anything the enemy could track. Each attempt at resistance was met with overwhelming force. The invaders' fleet, once imposing and confident, was now a shattered collection of vessels fleeing in terror, dismantled one by one as the Deathworlders closed the trap. The alien population, witnessing the final collapse of the invaders' resistance, experienced a profound emotional shift. Weeks of fear, despair, and uncertainty were replaced with cautious celebration. Children, who had lived in constant fear, could now glimpse hope. Adults, who had carried the burden of survival, began to breathe more freely. The alien leaders, though cautious, recognized that their civilization had been given a second chance. The Deathworlders had not merely defended the planet, they had reshaped the course of the conflict entirely. Their strategic, disciplined, and ruthless intervention ensured that survival was possible and that the invaders would not threaten the planet again. By the end of this turning point, the invaders were no longer a threat. Their forces were decimated, their morale destroyed, and their command structures in ruins. The Deathworlders, having executed their strategy with absolute precision, maintained their positions around the planet to ensure no resurgence could occur. That the alien civilization had survived against overwhelming odds, saved not by luck or conventional strength, but by the calculated, deliberate intervention of a force that answered only to its own code. The turning point in the battle marked not only the beginning of the end for the invaders but also a profound moment of transformation. For the alien world itself, a moment that would be remembered for generations as the day when hope returned. Guided by an unstoppable and merciless power, the battle had ended. From orbit and across the planet, the alien civilization surveyed a scene that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The invaders' fleet had been completely destroyed or scattered beyond hope of recovery. The remnants of the enemy had no choice but to retreat into the far reaches of space, and their presence no longer posed a threat to the SOS-sending aliens. Though the skies were still streaked with the fading trails of energy discharges, and some fires and damage remained on the planet, there was an undeniable sense of relief. The immediate danger had passed, and the people of the planet could finally begin to comprehend the magnitude of what had just occurred. They had been on the brink of total annihilation, and yet, in a single, decisive intervention, the Deathworlders had turned despair into survival. The aliens, now cautiously emerging from shelters, began to assess the damage and the cost of the invasion. Cities had been destroyed, orbital stations damaged, and vital supply lines severed. Families were reunited after terrifying separations. Though the grief for those lost weighed heavily on every mind, the population had witnessed destruction on a scale they had never imagined. And yet, amidst the devastation, there was a growing recognition of the opportunity for rebuilding. The intervention of the Deathworlders had saved countless lives, and their presence had ensured that the invaders could not recover, giving the civilization a chance to start anew. Even as the people began to pick up the pieces, the alien leaders faced difficult decisions. Rebuilding would require resources, careful planning, and strategic guidance. However, the immediate threat having been neutralized gave them the space to breathe and make rational choices. Engineers, scientists, and laborers all worked together. Inspired by the knowledge that their civilization had survived against impossible odds, there was a renewed sense of purpose throughout the population, driven not only by gratitude but also by awe at the power that had been brought to bear on their behalf. The Deathworlders had demonstrated a level of precision, intelligence, and strength that was unparalleled, leaving the aliens with a deep sense of respect and wonder. The Deathworlders themselves did not linger. Their intervention was decisive, efficient, and absolute. They had achieved their goal. The invaders were defeated, and the SOS sending aliens were now safe. Observers noted that the fleet moved with a singular focus, systematically sweeping through the area to ensure that no hidden threats remained. Energy readings were carefully monitored, and the fleet remained on alert until the last potential danger had been neutralized. Then, as silently as they had arrived, the Deathworlders began their withdrawal. Ships accelerated, moving away from the planet with such speed that the population could only watch in awe as the massive fleet disappeared into the darkness of space. There was no fanfare, no words of thanks, only lingering impression of an unstoppable force that had intervened with precision and left just as abruptly as it had arrived. The alien leaders reflected on the nature of the Deathworld. Unlike any ally or military force they had previously encountered, the Deathworlders operated on a code that was alien to most civilizations. They were not driven by politics, alliances, or diplomacy. They answered calls for help when a civilization faced imminent annihilation, delivering justice and survival in equal measure. They did not negotiate, they did not compromise, and they did not seek reward. Their intervention was guided by a singular principle: the protection of life, achieved through decisive, unrelenting action against aggressors. This understanding left the leaders both relieved and humbled. They knew that the survival of their civilization had been entrusted to a force beyond comprehension, a force that would not tolerate error or weakness. The psychological impact of the Deathworlders' presence was profound. The population, once terrified and demoralized, now carried a renewed sense of hope. Children played in the streets with a tentative sense of freedom, while adults worked tirelessly to rebuild homes, restore infrastructure, and restore essential services. Communities rallied together, inspired by the knowledge that they had survived against impossible odds. The alien leaders encouraged this collective effort, emphasizing cooperation, resilience, and the lessons learned from the crisis. There was a profound understanding that the survival of their civilization depended not only on external intervention but also on their own ability to adapt, rebuild, and strengthen for the future. As the weeks passed, the full scope of the Deathworlders' impact became clear. The invaders had not only been defeated but had been broken to such an extent that a return was nearly impossible. Communication lines between surviving enemy factions were disrupted, command structures destroyed, and morale utterly shattered. The galaxy had witnessed the consequences of challenging a civilization under the protection of the Deathworlders, and the story of the SOS sending aliens spread far and wide as a cautionary tale. Other civilizations learned from the events, recognizing the presence of forces in the universe far more powerful and efficient than they had previously imagined. The Deathworlders had not merely saved one world. They had sent a message that would ripple across the stars. The alien civilization, for its part, took careful steps to honor both the victory and the lessons learned. Monuments were erected, not only to commemorate the lives saved but also to remind future generations of the peril they had faced. Education systems incorporated the story of the Deathworlders' intervention, teaching children about the importance of resilience, strategic thinking, and the consequences of aggression. The SOS signal that had once been a desperate plea for help became a symbol of survival, hope, and the profound impact that decisive action could have on the fate of a civilization. The events were chronicled in records, holographic archives, and oral histories, ensuring that no one would forget the extraordinary forces that had shaped their survival. At the same time, the alien leaders focused on preparing their civilization for the future. While the Deathworlders' intervention had ensured survival, it had also highlighted vulnerabilities that could not be ignored. Defensive systems were upgraded, fleet strategies revised, and new technologies developed to detect and respond to threats more effectively. Diplomacy with neighboring civilizations was strengthened, creating alliances and support networks to prevent future crises. The lessons of the invasion and the intervention were carefully studied, creating a foundation for a stronger, more resilient civilization, capable of surviving in a galaxy filled with unknown dangers. The legacy of the Deathworlders extended beyond military and strategic considerations. Their intervention had instilled a sense of discipline, respect, and awareness of forces far beyond comprehension. The aliens had learned that survival in the galaxy was not only about technology or numbers, but also about understanding the vast and unpredictable nature of interstellar existence. They had witnessed the power of a civilization that could act decisively and without hesitation, protecting life and enforcing justice with unmatched skill. This knowledge reshaped their society, influencing governance, education, and cultural practices for generations to come. Civilians, too, were transformed by the experience. Those who had lived through the fear and destruction developed a new appreciation for life, community, and cooperation. Stories of bravery, endurance, and survival spread through families, neighborhoods, and communities. Children grew up knowing that their world had faced destruction and survived thanks to forces beyond their understanding. They learned the importance of resilience, the value of strategic thinking, and the consequences of aggression. The Deathworlders' intervention became more than a historical event, it became a moral and practical lesson for the civilization as a whole. Even the environment and infrastructure were impacted by the aftermath. Cities were rebuilt with greater efficiency, integrating technologies and designs learned from the battle. Orbital stations were reinforced, supply chains improved, and emergency response systems established to prevent future vulnerabilities. The scars of the conflict remained, but they were also reminders of survival and resilience. The planet itself seemed to reflect this shift, as communities worked together to restore natural environments, repair ecosystems, and re-establish a balance disrupted by the invasion. The Deathworlders' presence had forced the civilization to not only survive but also to grow stronger, wiser, and more prepared. Despite their withdrawal, the Deathworlders left a lasting impression on the aliens. There were no speeches, no ceremonies, and no words of thanks exchanged. Their intervention was silent, absolute, and efficient. Yet, the memory of their arrival and the decisive destruction of the enemy would remain in the minds of the people forever. They had faced annihilation, called upon forces of unimaginable power, and survived. The SOS that had been sent in desperation had been answered, not with negotiation or compromise, but with overwhelming action that ensured survival and justice. It was a lesson in the reality of the universe. Some forces were beyond reckoning, and when provoked, they acted with total precision and unstoppable strength. Over time, the alien civilization began to thrive once more. Trade resumed, research and exploration continued, and cultural development flourished. However, the memory of the Deathworlders remained a constant reminder of the precariousness of existence in the galaxy. Children grew up hearing stories of the fleet that had arrived in fury, and adults shared lessons of resilience, strategic thinking, and preparedness. The planet's history had been forever changed, shaped by an event that demonstrated both the danger of the universe and the potential for survival through decisive action. In the years that followed, the SOS-sending civilization became known across the galaxy, not just for their survival but for the extraordinary story of the Deathworlders' intervention. Scholars, historians, and strategists studied the events, analyzing the tactics, the decision-making, and the broader implications. The planet itself became a symbol of hope and resilience, a testament to the power of intervention by forces that acted without hesitation, enforcing justice and survival with unmatched efficiency. The legacy of the battle, and of the Deathworlders' decisive actions, but became a cornerstone of the civilization's identity, guiding future generations in both preparation and ethical understanding of power. Even though the Deathworlders had left, their influence remained. The alien leaders often reflected on the lessons learned, the importance of readiness, the value of intelligence and strategy, and the necessity of acting decisively in times of crisis. They understood that while the Deathworlders were not allies in the traditional sense, their intervention had been a gift, ensuring the continuation of life and civilization. The people of the planet, forever changed by what they had witnessed, carried these lessons into the future, shaping a society stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. The alien civilization had not only survived but had been reborn in the shadow of immense power. The SOS that had once been a desperate plea for help had resulted in salvation, a decisive turning of the tide, and a lasting legacy that would be remembered for generations. The Deathworlders, though gone, had left an indelible mark on the planet, its people, and the galaxy itself. The world would never forget the day when fury, precision, and justice arrived from the stars, saving an entire civilization from destruction and shaping its future in ways that would endure forever.